On behalf of the National Housing Conference, welcome to Solutions for Affordable Housing. The power of collaboration. I can't think of a more relevant theme for us to recognize and celebrate. The pandemic has presented an opportunity for housers to work together like never before. And that is what we have done. If we were meeting in person, I'd ask all of you to give yourselves a round of applause. We have a great lineup of speakers today who will talk about the major initiatives that have consumed so much of our time over the past year. Emergency assistance for renters and homeowners, modernizing the Community Reinvestment Act, and working together to end homelessness. The American Recovery Plan has made available more money for these priorities than ever before. We're also on the brink of passing the most significant, comprehensive, and impactful housing legislation in a generation. As more and more Americans are experiencing every day, the affordable housing production crisis must be addressed. Rising costs have become a major driver of inflation. It is the ultimate proof that all politics are local. The law of supply and demand is never repealed. To effectively deal with it, we must build more housing that is accessible to more of our fellow Americans. Build Back Better's housing programs exceed $175 billion today. My number for housing is more, but I'm thrilled with that level of investment. We've come as far as we have by working together, and we will be successful if we continue doing just that. NHC's contribution to all of this would not be possible without the generous support of JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Rocket Companies, and all of our 300 members. We'll be seeing some of their work later. Now I have the pleasure of welcoming Wells Fargo's Eileen Fitzgerald, Head of Housing Affordability Philanthropy, Social Impact and Sustainability, who will introduce our keynote speaker, Gene Sperling. Eileen has been a member of our Board of Governors and National Advisory Council. She is always willing to share her valuable experience and ask the questions that are the intellectual capital that informs so much of our success. Eileen, thank you for everything you do for NHC. Welcome.
Thank you so much, David. And it's great to be here. I guess I want to start with just thanking NHC for this opportunity, but really for the incredible work that they have done, especially during COVID. Wells Fargo has been a longtime advocate of NHC and a supporter since 2010. We provided more than $2.4 million in support for a whole variety of things. And, fundamentally, we believe it's so important to have an organization that NHC is, that brings people together across housing who have many different interests, many different perspectives. And I think that's never been as true as we have seen during the pandemic and the future we're going to have after that. I also just want to thank all of you for what you're doing every day. It has been, working on affordable housing and housing affordability is never easy, but it's been really especially challenging. So what happens is happening because of the work, whether you're in DC or you're on the ground making this happen. And we are so happy at Wells Fargo to be able to play our role in supporting that, whether that's through our financing on the rental side, excuse me, our homeownership financing, or what we're doing in philanthropy. And just really super quick, we focus on 4 strategies in philanthropy, which include increasing supply. I think we all know how incredibly important that is, to increase the supply of housing that's affordable, expanding homeownership, especially for BIPOC individuals and communities, increasing housing stability. How important have we seen we can talk all day long about lots of different strategies, but we need to figure out how we help people stay in their homes that they have. And then through that, we really think about how we support transformation and innovation that can scale. How can we do things differently? What can we learn? And we've been really excited that, the last 20 months plus the near-term future has given us many opportunities to think about what we're learning, and we're working with many researchers and evaluators around the country on that. So today, I'm really pleased and honored to be able to introduce Gene Sperling, his senior advisor to President Biden, who's with us today to discuss potential solutions to address affordable housing. You know, a lot of people talk about giving back in public service, taking 2 or 3 years out of their career to serve in government, but that's not Gene Sperling. He served our nation in 3 administrations as director of the National Economic Council, NEC, and assistant to the president for economic policy in the White House under President Clinton from 1997 to 2001, and under President Obama from 2011 to 2014. He was co-chair of the first White House Manufacturing Council and helped launch the Select USA initiative. He also served as counselor to Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner at the US Department of Treasury, and as a member of the President's Auto Task Force. Gene previously led Sperling Economic Strategies, which advises various companies, startups, and philanthropies and foundations. He was the founder and director in his short time not in government from 2002 to 2008 of the Center for Universal Education, which specializes in education for girls and boys in developing and conflict-impacted nations. He graduated from the University of Minnesota and Yale Law School and attended Wharton Business School at UPenn. Mr. Sperling is a seasoned columnist, commentator for Bloomberg Business News, has appeared on Meet the Press, Face the Nation, This Week, Good Morning America, Nightline, and so many more. But before I actually turn it over to Gene Sperling, I also want to highlight that he's overseeing the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, and more importantly, his personal commitment to making sure that funds from the Emergency Rental Assistance and the Homeownership Assistance Fund are hitting the ground as fast as possible and are reaching BIPOC communities and the renters and homeowners who need it most. I've seen him time and again engaging on Zoom with organizations around the nation to make this effort successful. And I just, you know, that's unique and not something that he has to do. And I think is just a statement and a testament to how much he really cares about this work. So with that, thank you, Mr. Sperling, and let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you to David for what you've done with the National Housing Council and the work we've done together since we both worked on helping Detroit rescue itself over a decade ago. I'm really honored to have a chance to speak to so many people who are so committed and working so hard on what I think is a basic part of economic dignity for all Americans, which is to have safe and secure housing for themselves and their family. The emergency rental assistance is, yes, there's over 200 programs in the American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion. But I would say the emergency rental assistance is the most challenging, frustrating, painful, ambitious, slow, then too fast, then path-breaking, meaningful American Rescue Plan all at the same time. It is all of those things. And I think that flows from 2 basic background realities, which is 1, our nation has never, ever had a national policy, no less a national infrastructure for humane eviction policies. We have not. Matt Desmond estimates that in a normal, non-pandemic, non-recessionary year, there are 3.6 million eviction filings every year, 3.6 million in a normal year, with a large percentage being for arrears in the range of $500 or $600. We let that happen every year, even though we know in our hearts and we know from evidence that there are few things that are more painful, more harmful to dignity, more likely to lead to homelessness, separate families, cause mental stress than an eviction, an unnecessary, avoidable eviction. And yet we've never had a policy or national infrastructure to do that. Now, when we were now asked to do this by Congress and the emergency rental assistance, the ask was to build all that infrastructure decentralized in 400 different jurisdictions with different governments, with different laws on evictions, with different court systems, with different capacity, all in an emergency situation. And on top of it, we were dealing with a degree of cooperation needed between landlords and tenants, not always the easiest relationship, and probably less easy in a time of pandemic and crisis when people are out of work, not been able to pay their rent at no fault of their own. So this was hard, but we have been hard on each other. We have been hard in pushing states and cities, and all of you have been hard on us, on pushing us to do better, be smarter, get smarter guidance, smartens policy out there. And, you know, we're right to do that. There can't be excuses when something is so high stakes as eviction prevention. So the fact that it's hard, that's just part of the necessity that we have to overcome. And if we're not, then we're not doing well enough, and there's no excuses. The stakes are too high. Now, you know, I like to think of the times when I've been in panels and days where we talk about evidence and random controlled studies and all the things that you like to do with policy, you know, over several years and determining what works and doesn't work. It kind of reminded me of like Mike Tyson's famous line that boxers come at him with all this strategy and then he just hits them in the face. I think you can want to come with all the random controlled experiments and deep based evidence, but then reality hits you in the face. You're trying to get this emergency rental assistance up. There are people in crisis, and you've got to learn as quickly as you can, as well as you can. And it really then comes to why everybody, so many people on this phone have been so essential. We have indeed tried to listen, to learn, to reach out, to see what's working, not working, to take criticism, to accept much of the criticism, to respond. Because quite frankly, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice to wait for a year and see how the program's going. We have had to respond that quickly. And so many of you, I think Diane Yentel, who's been a big critic at times, but has really used her network to inform us of so many different things on the ground. And we have responded on May 7th with major guidance that cut documentation, made more direct tenant payments possible, prevented discrimination against people getting federal assistance. But we went on in June 25th and then again in August 25th. With new guidance, hearing so much what people were saying about ensuring people knew the program was eligible for homelessness, that continually reassuring that you could minimize documentation, use self-attestation. All of those things were in response to listening to the people and the organizations and the groups around the country, many of which are on the call. And that is because that is the best we could do, and we had to do the best we can do, and we still have to, and we're still not done, and we're still not getting everything right, and we still need to listen and learn. Now, another thing that we did too was we reached out and asked what else that's not technically emergency rental assistance should we be doing? And the message we got was we had to deal with the legal side, the court system, the fact that evictions were too often a first choice, not a last choice. And so we launched a nationwide effort to encourage eviction diversion and court reform and right to representation. We did 2 White House summits. We got the Associate Attorney General, Vanita Gupta, to write a really path-breaking letter around the country. The Attorney General called 35 chief justices of Supreme Courts around. We have done outreach to the Pro Bono Council. We have 99 law school deans that are committing their law school clinics to help on this. And right now there are 71 eviction diversion programs in 31 states that we think are making a very large difference. Now, I could take your whole panel going through all of the struggles that we have and are still going. But I think the summer, as many of us experienced, was a period of mixed success. We saw that some places, some local leaders took advantage of all of the flexibilities that were given, all of the tools, put their own local leadership on the ground. And some of them were not just doing well, they were crushing it. They were using self-attestation and bulk payments and proxies and working in combination with their courts and getting significant amount of funds out. And yet we saw other places not doing well at all, meaning that large gaps of our population were not getting the protection that this government intended them to get. Now, that was a complicated issue because if your program's working in some places, not in others, then you have to deal with what are the behavioral, what are the issues that are preventing that. And we did a massive amount of outreach and did a lot. And I think that it did end up paying off. One, understanding more clearly why people were being, to us, excessively cautious in not using the full degree of flexibilities. I will say getting the president out there to really pound on states and cities to do better. I think the reality of the end of the national eviction moratorium, all of these I do think started to spur more. And when we did the August 25th guidance, to be honest, that clarity on self-attestation, a lot of that was already there. It was responding to people who knew they could do it, but wanted more assurance, wanted to have more evidence against their state auditors that they could do that. That is how listen to those of us, you, and respond. And that's why we need to do, we'll continue to do more of that. All of this, I think, was definitely done in what we considered a race with time. We wanted, we knew programs were getting started up. When you're getting a program started up, it's not going to grow at a few percent. If you can get it fully going, if you can get the right policies, if you can get the right simplification, then you know that that growth can be, if not exponential, at least dramatic. But the question was, could we get it up in time for the end of the eviction moratorium, whenever that was? And were we fearful of that moment? You bet. Scared me to death. When we went and talked to experts, what we basically heard was there were 300,000 eviction filings per month in a normal period, that at the end of a national eviction moratorium lasting for a year or more, that there could easily be 2-3 times that amount. So we could be facing 600, 900,000, 1 million evictions. And if we only had a small amount of ERA assistance out, we were not going to have that make that meaningful difference. Now, I think in assessing right now how well it has done and not done, what it has done well and what it has missed, I think it is important to measure tough, but you have to measure meaningfully too. And I'm going to take a moment because this is an important group, and it's important that you should be tough on us and tough on the emergency rental assistance, but let's do it in a way that educates the public correctly. There got to be a tendency for people to simply say, oh, after 3 or 4 or 5 months, what percentage of $46.5 billion was out there? And that was relayed to the public as a way of measuring how this program was doing. Well, guess what? The emergency rental assistance, the first 25 billion, ERA 1, goes till at least September of 2022. ERA 2 goes till 2025. This is multi-year funding, and deciding in the 3rd or 4th or 5th month to measure how it's doing would be a little bit like some of your employees coming in after 1 month and saying, you've only paid me 8.5% of my salary. You failed me. No, you have to take a more meaningful look. Now, the meaningful look is what percentage of the need of eligible ERA recipients are we meeting on a monthly basis? I don't think we are meeting all of that need. I know we are not meeting all of that need. And we should be tough in looking at that. But that is the meaningful criteria that we should be assessing as ourselves, not giving not giving a standard that makes people think that looks at a stock at a particular moment, as opposed to the flow over time and whether it is meeting that need. Now, what do we know? We know that the program has grown significantly. In May, there were 159,000 families who got their full arrears covered. That is much more than anything our country's ever done. But if it felt like a pittance to you, believe me, it felt like a pittance to us, and more importantly, to the families and the landlords that were not getting coverage. But by September, that number was 514,000. And the amount of funds going out were 2.8 billion. So you have to ask yourself, not what's the percentage of your 5-year total, but what does that mean for a flow of funds that you have? And what you can see is that would imply, if you just stayed at the levels that we are, that we're going to serve, that we've already served 2 million households, and that you'd get 3.5 to 4 million by the end of 2021, 3.5 to 4 million. And the funds going out would be, at this pace, would be 18, 19, $20 billion that could be out. But here's an important point, and I think people here who are experts need to understand this. Those numbers are the amount of outlays, the amount of expenditures, how much has actually been spent. It does not tell you how much has been obligated. And when you start looking at how much is obligated, you start getting a very different story. So you start realizing that for some places that are up and going, who have gotten up, who are using self-attestation, who are using flexibilities, that the demand and the applications are coming in. So in the program that people were writing about that only had 5, say it had 5, 10, or 12% out, we just had this week, New York, Oregon, and Texas say they have to close down taking applications. I want to make clear what they're saying. They are saying that they have obligated all of their ERA 1 and ERA 2 funds. Now, we want to see the money go out the door, but they are so this program that was always described as money going out way, way too slow, we are now in a position where, and it is not just the 3 of those states, in several states, in several major cities, they are about to run through their funds. And so we have to start describing and talking about this in a more accurate way. This is a program that is getting out meaningfully and substantially, but not equitably across the country. And understanding these numbers is important for helping people prepare for how we deal with reallocation, how we deal with the remainder of the emergency rental assistance, and the other programs that we have. Now, on reallocation, remember, the first reallocation is just of ERA 1. It's just, that's 25 billion. If you look at these numbers just on expenditures by the end of the year, you can tell, I mean, that money includes ERA 1 and ERA 2, but if we're on to have expenditures of 18, 19, 20 billion, and you start adding obligations, you can be sure that a very, very substantial amount of ERA 1 will not be available for reallocation. There will be reallocation, but it will not be an endless stream that can meet everyone's need. And people need to understand that reality, and we need to all do a little better in communicating that. Now, there is potential, of course, to reallocate ERA 2 as well, but that process doesn't even start until March of 2022. Now, when you think of reallocation, think of 4 buckets, because these 4 buckets will give you a sense of what an intelligent policy is and why there will be reallocation to places who need it, but not likely nearly enough to meet the demand. The first bucket is what we're seeing, which I would say high need, and fast moving programs. They're the ones that are up and going and are now getting so many applications that they are obligating through their ERA and ERA 1 and ERA 2. They're the ones, cities and states, that are coming quickest to get funds reallocated. There's a second bucket. That's a bucket where people are really meeting their timelines. They have high need. They're not moving as fast, but they're not moving so slow that the money from them will be reallocated. So they're on track, though not as quickly, but their money will not be available to be reallocated because they are hitting their targets. Then there's a third bucket. These are places that are not performing well, but they are high need. Now, I agree, we in the administration agree very much with something that the Low Income Housing Coalition stated recently. We should not as a country be seeking to punish people twice with ERA reallocation. They get punished first because their governments failed to get funds out quickly, and then we take the money away from them and give them to another state. So in those bucket 3, we are going to be seeking to reallocate within the state. If a state has failed, then we will be looking to work with cities, other jurisdictions, encourage nonprofit participation, anything to help those people. You don't want to simply just take the funds. You want to reallocate there, but perhaps reallocate within so that the population that's been punished once by a low performing government is not punished twice by reallocation. That's good. That's the right thing to do for those folks. But again, that's a third bucket where you don't have as much available. The fourth bucket is going to be the places that are not performing particularly well and have low need. And there will be reallocation there, but I'm going to be straight with you. Those are not necessarily the biggest states with the biggest amounts of funds. So we are in a situation now where we are going to have to be using reallocation, one, to encourage more of the slow performers to get best practices and catch up, and no more excuses. Too many of your peers are getting all their funds out. There's no reason for you not to be using best practices. So one, we're going to encourage. Two, we're going to try to reallocate within places to make sure the people in those states are getting the best help that they can, that their citizens are not being robbed of those funds. And then third, we do want to try to reallocate more to these high need places that are moving through. And likely many of them will get reallocation, but I can't pretend it's going to fully meet the demand that they have. So I want to just do a close in thinking a little bit about this. Obviously, our focus is on how to use these funds the best as we can right now. But it's hard to think of anything that you'd say is good news in an area that's so painful and deals with such heartbreak for so many families. But that feared tsunami. But what we can say about the emergency rental assistance is this: it is not covering everyone it needs. It is leaving some painful gaps and is still allowing a painful, avoidable heartbreaks and evictions. But it has had a meaningful impact on preventing the feared tsunami. Instead of double historic averages, triple historic averages, we have seen from the two places that track, the legal service corporations and the eviction lab, that not only did you not see a doubling or tripling, but after 11 weeks, you are seeing from 55 to 70% of historic averages. Even the last 6 weeks have been there. Now, that's understandable if you think of the fact that normally 300,000 people get eviction filings in a normal year. If you're giving over 500,000 a month to people on an ongoing basis where you're paying their full arrears, it's going to have a meaningful impact, and it is having a meaningful impact. And of course, numbers can be off, but the fact is that 11 weeks in a row, 2 different independent places has shown that we are below historic averages, not double or triple. That doesn't mean it's not going up in some places. It is, but it is below historic averages almost across the country. That would not have happened without the work of so many people here, and certainly without the emergency rental assistance. But, you know, the president's expression is build back better. If there was ever a place that build back better had meaning, it is on our eviction policy. Nobody feels, you know, let me say this. This has been a national teaching moment on our lack of humane eviction policies. So when we go back to even below historic averages, it doesn't feel that good to people because the status quo doesn't feel good. Going back to a situation where we have so many heartbreaking and unnecessary evictions in our country is not satisfactory. And so I think as we look forward, figure out the reallocation, figure out how to use these funds better, figure out how to get more of the funds out to the place that are not, be more efficient, all of those things, looking to the future. One, what are we going to do to make sure that we build back better and not just go back to what I think is a disgraceful and inhumane eviction policy? What are we going to do? I'll tell you one thing we could do, we could start is, why should anybody who got evicted during a pandemic carry the scar of eviction on them and keep them from doing well and getting future housing and have their credit hurt, et cetera? Let's start talking about what we can do to expunge those evictions and not have that be a scar that keeps people back because they happen to be alive and unable to be working or having health issues during a pandemic. Two, we need to look hard at this whole issue on the court side, the eviction diversion, the right to counsel. How do we make eviction a last resort, not a first resort? There's always going to be evictions, but how do we make it a last resort, not a first resort? How do we make sure the system is fair? Do we need ongoing support so that landlords and tenants have more incentive, like they do with ERA, to work together, to mediate, to work out things? It is easier to do eviction diversion when there is funding, like there is right now for ERA. These are things we have to think about. And obviously the affordable housing. We've made a big step forward, but we're going to have to continue to make a step forward. So we got to keep building back. We're not there. We're not perfect. And we are a place that wants to be told what we should be doing better. And we want to keep doing better and use every penny of the emergency rental assistance to help as many families, tenants, landlords in need as possible. But it is also worth asking, do we want to just go back to where we were, or do we want to go back to something better? I think the people wouldn't be on this call if you didn't want to ultimately go back to something better. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. That was fantastic. And you've actually anticipated some of my questions. I did want to just note that there are very few people in this town who embrace their critics and respond to them by saying, okay, so what more do we need to be doing? And how can we do that better? And let's talk again. And that attitude is just so unusual and so refreshing. It's pretty obvious to me why the president picked you to do this incredibly difficult job. So let me ask you briefly, can you share some examples of state or local programs that have really had the most success, why you think that might be?
You know, I think that all of us have learning experience. And I will say that one thing I've appreciated is that I've been on the phone often with some tough critics, and they'll say also, I'll say, well, what, you didn't say that to me a month ago. And they say, well, we didn't really realize it till right now. We're all learning as we go. One of the things that we learned was how deep the cautiousness was. Now, when I talk to places that are performing poorly, people often think you're going to be talking to somebody incompetent. That's not what I find. I often find somebody who's very conscientious. They're just more conscientious about dotting every I, crossing every T, than they are at realizing that this program does need to move quick, that people's lives are on the line. And I think there is a feeling out there that goes something like, Yeah, it's really nice to hear from you, Mr. Sperling. It's nice you have a big White House job. It's nice that you're telling me to move fast, but will you be here 2 years from now for me when the state auditor comes? And so what I've seen is that what overcomes that is when the mayor or governor takes ownership of it. It's not fair, I think, to let so many places have an individual who doesn't feel like they're a brand new policymaker, who maybe has gone through the rails on unemployment insurance fraud or PPP fraud, or had SIGTARP criticizing them for ordering a cappuccino instead of black coffee somewhere, to make all these risks. Where you've seen a mayor take control, say, this is my program, I think you connect. I think one, people get that their boss is telling them to do this and they start moving. And secondly, you just start seeing all the pieces work together. When you talk to the mayor of San Antonio, or you talk to the mayor of Louisville, they're not just doing one thing right. They're usually doing several things. They're usually doing their outreach right. They're doing their last mile outreach right. They're doing their documentation. They're working with their court systems. So I think that, I think you just can't, that comprehensive view is so important. I think the thing that's obviously, there was one point where Noel Boyer and I just said, we're going to call places that aren't getting the funds out and really go deep. And, a lot of the August 25th self-attestation guidance wasn't as new. I mean, you could do almost everything in there, but people would say, we know it, but we want to hear it more clear. We don't want to just know it. We want to be able to show it to our state auditor. We want more and more assurance. Now you can kind of say, well, how much do you have to give? But you have to realize there were places not giving the funds out, and you had to do that. I also think that when the moratorium started ending and President Biden started like actually going after places, I will tell you, I got calls from governors and mayors saying, oh, I heard that, we're on it, I'm on it. And you saw some big results. I don't think those were lazy governors and mayors. They're overwhelmed with vaccinations and the state and local program, and they had not made it a top priority. Not when people do, and they put together all the pieces. Flexible documentation that doesn't make you have to come back a second, third, and fourth time has been critical. Coordination with your court system has been critical. And I think really, again, the leadership from the mayor or governor's office that this is a priority moves the bureaucracy. I hate the phrase the bureaucracy, moves honest, good civil servants to understand that they've got to move with speed, and that's coming from the top.
Well, that's great. And we are out of time, but I want to just thank you so much for your leadership, helping us get this money out to the people who desperately need it. And I will want to note, just as well as you and Noel and all of the people on your team, but also Marietta and Doug and Diane and Stockton, who we're going to be hearing from shortly, is, we will never meet 99.9% of the people we help, but there are millions of lives that are going to be changed for the better and that have been because of the work we're doing. And I hope we just always keep that in mind, because it's just an amazing way to pay forward all the gifts we've received and the experience that we've gained in our careers. So
and David,
thank you so much for joining us.
I really want to say one thing too, which is, I want to go back to the start, which is we do not have the benefit of random controlled experiments, look backs from a year or two. The things that people on your panel, Diane, Stockton, others written, I mean, we read them closely, we meet. If we don't do anything, it's because there was a difficult balance. And then sometimes we realize we were wrong and should have done something sooner. We're not about defending, we're about listening. If it wasn't for the critics that we have, we would not be doing nearly as well, even though I know we haven't made anybody completely happy. So it's not a challenge. It's like we have counted on it. And so this is a place where what people write, what they advocate is being listened to by your government, by myself, by Erica, by Joe, by Noel, by Emily. All of us are really completely focused and dependent. And without that criticism, without that feedback from the ground, we would not be doing as well as we are, which is not good enough, not nearly good enough for all the families who need help, which is why we need even more feedback and more back and forth. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. And I will give a quick shout out to Erica Potig, who has, as
Yes,
special assistant to the president, has been a really incredibly effective conduit for us
Yeah.
to help, communicate with the White House. It is definitely the most open and accessible and responsive White House that I've ever worked with, Republican and Democratic administrations for 35 years. So thank you.
Thank you very much.